What's up guys, Ivan here, and today we're going to talk about compressors. Over the last few years I've built up my pedal board, and now I've got a couple of distortions, an octave pedal, compressor, tuner, etc, etc. And I remember that when I got my first compressor, I was really confused on how to set up the controls because the names are kind of confusing and the way they react, they kind of interact with each other. So I figured I would explain it to you guys, especially since I've been talking to all different bass players, and the opinions on compressors really range. Like some people say that they hate compressors because they squash their signal too much, or they say that they are kind of like a crutch because they're dynamic tools and they don't need a compressor. So I would figure I just want to give my opinions on them and try to explain them as simple as I can. Usually in a compressor you have 5 controls, and that is especially the case for studio rack compressors. You got 5 controls, and they are threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup gain. The threshold could be described as a line, as a barrier that you set, you move up or down in volume, kind of. That sets when the compressor is going to start to react to your signal. So let's say I've got my threshold set up at minus 10 dB, and my bass is only playing like at this level. That means that none of my signal is getting compressed, because no matter how loud I play, I'm not reaching the threshold to make the compressor start working, because it's going to start to work from here onwards. So in order to be able to use the compressor, I have to either make the bass louder or lower the threshold to match my input level. So to sum it up, the threshold sets the moment at when the compressor starts to interact with your bass signal. Then you've got the ratio, and that is usually seen as a fraction. You've got 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 10 to 1, infinity to 1 as well. And that means that for every dB that comes up from the threshold, it is going to come up only 1 dB louder. So for example, using the previous example, if I set up my threshold at minus 10 dB, and I was to set up the ratio at 4 to 1, for example, whenever I cross the signal by 4 dB, the actual sound that's going to come out is only going to be 1 dB louder. If I was to cross with the same ratio, but I was to cross it with 8 dB louder, so kind of like this much, it would come up as 2 dB louder. If you got a 10 to 1 ratio, that's kind of considered already limiting, because you've got to exceed the threshold by a lot more in order for it to come out 1 dB louder. And infinity to 1 is kind of called brick wall limiters, because no matter how hard you're gonna pass the threshold, it's gonna squash your signal right at the top. It's gonna slide it, so you're never gonna be louder than your threshold. And then you've got attack and release, and those two controls are really interactive, and they also set the character, so to speak, of how your compressor is gonna react. A great way to picture how the attack now works is to imagine it as being a fader, a volume fader. And the way you adjust it is how fast you're gonna move that fader up or down in reaction to the signal that's being fed. So if I have a fast attack time, my hand is gonna move pretty quickly to bring down the volume. If I had a slower attack, my hand is gonna take a bit longer to react to the signal while bringing down the volume. And what that does is, for example, in the case of a slower attack, because I'm taking longer to start moving the fader down, more of the transient, that is the initial attack of the note, is going to come through. And that's going to make it sound more percussive. If I had a fast attack, because I'm really reacting faster, that's going to the compressor is going to catch the transient sometimes even before it completely expands, and it's going to make the sound a bit smoother. And what I just described are two pretty extreme scenarios, but a great way to picture it is a slow attack is going to make your sound more percussive, and a fast attack it's gonna sound a bit more smooth. And then you've got release time. And using the previous analogy as well, that is the time that it takes my hand to bring the fader back to its original volume. So if I had a fast release time, I would bring down that fader to its original volume pretty quickly, sometimes even almost immediately. And by using a slow release time, it's going to take me longer to bring it back. And then you've got the makeup gain, which can be used to raise the volume of things that were compressed. For example, because you're compressing the loudest notes, you're bringing them down in volume, but the quieter passages are left uncompressed, for example. By using the makeup gain, you're gonna make everything sound more compact, more even. So you've got a kind of steadier sound. It doesn't have to be used that way, but it can be used. And now, like I mentioned before, I've met a lot of people that say that they don't use compressors because they don't need it. Their playing is already good enough, and it's a band-aid for sloppy playing. But that is not really the case. Compressors are also tone shaping tools, because there are compressors that are pretty transparent, so they don't color your sound at all. But a lot of them do, and also some of them in really pleasing ways, and they give a lot of character to the sound. You've got tube compressors, you've got Opto style compressors, FET style compressors, and they all impart a certain character to your sound. So even if you're not really heavily compressing your signal, you can gain some of the benefits of that compressor, the sound characteristics, by putting it in your signal. And just as an example, if you have a tube compressor, probably your sound is going to sound a bit more warm, because of all the harmonics that are being pushed through that tube. If you got an FET style compressors, those are really known for its punchiness, they really put the bass really up front in a pleasing way though. So I would encourage you to give compressors a try, and also experiment with different settings, because different music scenarios call for different adjustments. Some songs or some type of music might require you to have a smoother attack time, or a slower attack time, for example. Or even placing the compressor in different parts of your chain, because if you put it at the end of your pedal board, for example, it's going to sound completely different than if you put it at the beginning. And that also affects how the rest of your pedals are going to react. A pretty good example, and one that I experiment a lot with, is placing it before or after distortions. And because if you place it right before a distortion, the level that's going into the overdrive, it's going to be pretty constant if you set it that way, of course. And the overdrive is going to react in a certain way. If you put it after the distortion, then your overdrive is going to react to all your dynamics, all your spikes and everything, and then that is being fed onto the compressor, which is going to act upon that signal, and it really gives a different character. But like I mentioned, I would encourage you to try different settings, different positions, different compressors, different ratios, and try not to look at compressors as if they were the enemy. They're just a tool to have in your sonic palette, because the more you know about how to set them up, the better you can apply them, and you're gonna know when to use one if needed, or when not to use one. So I hope you find this helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.